Hi everyone, Hannah here. I looked at observations this week for our jigsaw. So a description of observations is an observation is carefully watching and recording what you see and hear in a setting in a systematic way. So as I read the textbook and looked at the different texts that were posted on the course, I found that there were different types of observers and there were different types of observations. So I'm going to go over a few of those. Active participant observer is the teacher observes the outcome of their teaching while teaching. Privileged active observer is observing our students during a time when we're not in charge of teaching the lesson. And then there was passive observer, which focuses on the data collection. And the book had this quote that stuck out to me. It said, "Today I'm going to watch and learn from what you're doing." I thought that was important. You're kind of just taking a seat back and learning from your kids almost. One of the other texts talked about structured observation. So it talked about that being when the observer is only observing. So I kind of compared that to the privileged active observer. You're not in charge of anything, you're simply observing. And then the unstructured observation talked about allowing the observer some flexibility. So they can be doing other things, but they can also be observing some periods of time and taking their notes. Qualitative or quantitative. So observations are qualitative. Things can be observed, obviously, but not necessarily measured numerically. The text talked about observations being helpful when other forms of data collection won't work. And some things that I kind of picked up on and then related back to my own, experience with observations, because observations are a big part of my job, is checking for those nonverbal reactions. You're really watching behavior. And I know in my job a lot, I observe my students when they're working in small groups, and I'm checking for those peer interactions. The text also talked a lot about field notes. So field notes are written records of participant observers. They observe and record everything you can. Sometimes the observer looks for nothing in particular, and sometimes they look for bumps. So I'm kind of going to go through those categories and explain them a little more now. So the observe and record everything you possibly can is literally doing just that. You're typing out everything you see. And I know when I do my observations, that's what I do. I just type. I sit in the back of the room and I type everything I see. Like if they, put their iPad under their desk, I write it down, and then afterwards I kind of go through and pick and choose the important stuff to me. The observe and look for nothing in particular. The text talks about it as you're trying to see a routine in a different way. So you're kind of being those new eyes. And then the looking for bumps. I found this one interesting. You consider the environment you're observing to be flat, so there's nothing that stands out to you, and it's an opportunity to look for bumps in the setting. So these bumps might be unexpected student responses, or a teaching strategy, or an unexpected response to a new classroom management plan, which I found interesting and something I'm going to try next time I'm in a classroom observing my students. Strengths and weaknesses of observation. So some strengths that I kind of picked out were, it's a great way to gather data and info about student behavior. And that's mainly what I use observation for. Another strength was the teacher might see things the student would not report. And lastly, I put the use of video recordings allows teachers to see more than what their eyes can. And I kind of thought about in my years, I haven't really used video recording in any of my observations, but oddly enough, today I was talking to a teacher and he mentioned how they had parent consent to record when a student was having an incident. So we can kind of look back on it and see if we can pick up anything in particular as it's happening that we can try to prevent in the future. Weaknesses. We don't have time. If we're in the middle of teaching, sometimes we see things and we're like, oh, we want to pick up on that. We want to note that. By the time we have actual time to note it, we forgot it. The other one the text talked about was the observer may have to wait to observe a certain behavior, and that kind of stuck out to me. I know a lot of times if my students see me in the background, they know what I'm looking for, so they won't do a particular behavior. So I might have to like surprise them or make myself not known in the room, which is difficult sometimes, and it could take a few sessions or class periods for me to actually see a behavior. The other one I wrote down was different observers see different things. You know, two teachers could be in a room and we pick up on different behaviors or we interpret behaviors differently. Some concerns, which kind of piggybacked off my last slide, I kind of felt like, but I wrote some new ones down too. So students may act differently. Again, that kind of goes back to what I was just talking about. When if you're in the room, students know they're being observed, they're going to change their behavior and you're not necessarily going to get the true picture. And the observer may not see important behaviors. You know, we're human, we miss things. It happens. And lastly, the observer may interpret something differently. Again, like I mentioned, we all see things differently, and we might interpret different nonverbals differently, and that could kind of skew things if you're looking for something in particular and you're working in a team and you're both observing. You can come back with different data that may not always mesh together nicely. So that is what I have for observations, and thanks for listening.